Before Columbus, before the Mayflower, North America was a land of vibrant, complex civilizations. For thousands of years, hundreds of distinct nations, from the mighty Aztec and Inca empires in the south to the Haudenosaunee Confederacy in the northeast, built cities, developed sophisticated agriculture, and created rich cultural traditions. They were the true first pioneers, and they weren't entirely alone. Around the year 1000, longships landed on the shores of what we now call Newfoundland. Norse explorers, Vikings led by Leif Erikson, established a small, short-lived settlement. It was a fleeting encounter, a whisper of the dramatic changes to come, but it was the first documented moment Europe touched the Americas. For another 5 centuries, the two worlds remained separate, but the whispers grew into a storm. By the late 15th century, a new era was dawning in Europe, the Age of Discovery. Driven by a thirst for gold, a desire for new trade routes to Asia, and the zeal of religious conversion, European monarchies looked westward across the vast, unknown Atlantic. Spain, fresh from its Reconquista, funded an Italian navigator named Christopher Columbus. His 1492 voyage didn't reach the East Indies as he'd planned, but instead it slammed the door of the Old World wide open to the new. This discovery ignited a frantic race. Spain pushed deep into the Caribbean, Mexico, and South America, toppling empires and extracting immense wealth. Not to be outdone, England sent John Cabot to explore the northern coasts, while France dispatched Jacques Cartier, who sailed up the St. Lawrence River, laying the groundwork for New France. These early expeditions were a chaotic scramble of mapping, claiming and often brutal first encounters with the continent's inhabitants. The map of North America began to be redrawn, not with the lines of ancient tribal territories, but with the bold, competing claims of distant European kings. With the maps came the colonists. The dream was one of riches and a new life, but the reality was often a brutal struggle for survival. The English learned this the hard way. In 1587, a settlement was established on Roanoke Island, off the coast of modern-day North Carolina. But when a supply ship returned 3 years later, the colony had vanished. Over 100 men, women, and children were gone, leaving behind only a single, cryptic word carved into a post: Croatoan. The lost colony of Roanoke became a haunting cautionary tale. England's next attempt, Jamestown, founded in 1607, nearly met the same fate. Beset by disease, starvation, and conflict with the local Powhatan Confederacy, the colonists endured a horrific period known as the Starving Time. It was only the disciplined leadership of John Smith and the introduction of a profitable tobacco crop that saved Jamestown from becoming another ghost story. To the north, a different group of English settlers, the Pilgrims, landed at Plymouth in 1620. Seeking religious freedom, they too faced a brutal first winter. Their survival was largely thanks to the assistance of the Wampanoag people, particularly a man named Squanto who taught them how to cultivate local crops. These precarious footholds at Jamestown and Plymouth, one driven by profit and the other by piety, became the enduring foundations of English America. Just as these colonies were beginning to stabilize, another event occurred that would forever stain the nation's soul and shape its destiny. In August 1619, a ship named the White Lion arrived at Point Comfort, Virginia. On board were 20-odd captive Africans, who were sold to the colonists in exchange for food. This was the beginning of chattel slavery in English North America. It wasn't a sudden institution, but one that evolved cruelly over decades. As the demand for labor on tobacco and later, cotton and sugar plantations exploded, the system became more entrenched and more brutal. This insatiable demand fueled the monstrous triangle trade. Ships left Europe with manufactured goods, sailed to Africa to trade them for enslaved people, endured the horrific Middle Passage across the Atlantic where millions died, and then sold the survivors in the Americas for raw materials to take back to Europe. This system didn't just build economies. It was built on the systematic dehumanization and destruction of millions of African lives, creating a racial hierarchy and a legacy of suffering that would haunt the continent for centuries to come. The profits from this trade enriched nations and built empires, but its human cost was immeasurable and its consequences are still felt today. The initial interactions between colonists and Native Americans were complex, a fragile dance between cooperation and conflict. We all know the story of the first Thanksgiving in 1621, a harvest feast shared between the Plymouth Pilgrims and the Wampanoag people, a moment often romanticized as a symbol of peace. But this harmony was the exception, not the rule, and it was tragically short-lived. As colonial populations grew and pushed further inland, demands for land intensified. Cultural misunderstandings, broken treaties, and outright aggression became commonplace. The balance of power began to shift dramatically. This tension finally erupted into open warfare. In New England, what began as a fragile peace degenerated into one of the most devastating conflicts in American history. King Philip's War, from 1675 to 1676, a coalition of native tribes led by the Wampanoag sachem Metacom, whom the English called King Philip, fought a desperate, brutal war to push the colonists out. The war was catastrophic for both sides, but especially for the native population. Entire villages were destroyed, and the Native American power in southern New England was shattered forever. The war marked a point of no return. It transformed the relationship from one of tense coexistence to one of conquest and subjugation, setting a grim pattern for the centuries of conflict that would follow. The struggles in North America weren't happening in a vacuum. The continent was a chessboard for the great powers of Europe. Wars that began over royal succession in Vienna or Madrid had bloody consequences in the forests and river valleys of the New World. The War of the Spanish Succession, for example, was known in America as Queen Anne's War. The War of the Austrian Succession was called King George's War. These were not just colonial skirmishes. They were global imperial conflicts. France and Britain, along with their respective Native American allies, fought viciously for control of the fur trade, key forts, and strategic territories from the Ohio Valley to Acadia. For Native American tribes, these wars were a geopolitical nightmare. They were often forced to choose sides, pitting tribe against tribe. A victory for their European ally might bring temporary benefits, but the ultimate outcome was always the same: more land lost, more populations decimated by war and disease, and more erosion of their sovereignty. The European powers saw the continent as a prize to be won, and the native peoples were caught in the crossfire of an imperial struggle that was systematically destroying their world, border by border, battle by battle. By the mid-18th century, the rivalry between Britain and France for control of North America was reaching its climax. The flashpoint was the rich, strategic Ohio River Valley, a territory claimed by both empires. This conflict, known in America as the French and Indian War and in Europe as the 7 Years' War, was truly the First World War. The initial clashes went poorly for the British. In 1754, a young, ambitious Virginia militia officer was sent to the Ohio Valley to deliver a message demanding the French leave. His name was George Washington. His mission failed and resulted in a skirmish that essentially started the war. The following year, Washington served as an aide to General Braddock on a disastrous expedition to capture Fort Duquesne. But the tide turned when Britain, under the leadership of William Pitt, committed massive resources to the fight. They captured key French forts including Louisbourg, Quebec, and Montreal. The fall of Quebec in 1759 in a dramatic battle on the Plains of Abraham was the decisive blow. The Treaty of Paris in 1763 officially ended the war. France was forced to cede all of its North American territory east of the Mississippi to Britain. In a single stroke, Great Britain became the undisputed colonial power on the continent. But this victory came with a massive war debt and a vast new territory to govern. The effort to manage this new empire and pay for its defense would lead Britain to impose new taxes and regulations on its American colonies. The seeds of another conflict, one that would pit Britain against its own colonists, had been sown on the battlefields of the French and Indian War. The stage was set for revolution. Thank you so much for watching. We've journeyed from the earliest civilizations through the age of empires. If you found this history as fascinating as I do, please hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the past. Let me know in the comments what part of this story stood out to you the most. See you in the next video.